Hello, everyone, and welcome to a special episode of Gay Men Going Deeper with your surprise guests and hosts. We have Star, Miguel, Andre, and Reno. Um, Today's episode is a deep, potentially heavy, important introductory and ongoing conversation around the topic of internalized racism. I want to start by saying as well that we're not experts on this topic, nor do we or our opinions or experiences or perspectives represent all BIPOC people. We're simply here to have a conversation, share some of our own experiences with internalized racism, some of our own learnings and insights, in the hope that you will leave this episode feeling informed, educated, curious, possibly humbled as well, and really open to continuing the conversation and the journey to um, understanding the impacts of racism and internalized racism. This conversation is not exclusive to people of color. In fact, I would recommend that if there are people of European descent that you are connected with or that are listening right now or curious about this particular episode, that you do in fact listen. And that if you are a BIPOC listener currently, that you share this with your friends and family members of European descent. It's a conversation for everyone because racism, racial prejudice, racial discrimination, and internalized racism really does affect everyone, you know. So I think it's important that everyone be a part of this conversation, and that everyone participate in sharing it as well. So before we dive in, um, I want to introduce everyone, or I'd like everyone to introduce themselves actually, so no pressure, and to share why you said yes to having this conversation, and to also share maybe a bit of what internalized racism means to you. And we'll dive deeper, obviously, but this is just kind of an opener. So, who are you? Why did you say yes to this conversation? And what does internalized racism mean to you? Anyone, feel free to start. I'm also happy to go first if nobody else wants. Yeah.
So, my name is Andre. And the question is, why did I want to be part of this conversation? Um, I wanted to be part of this conversation because I think it would be really helpful for me as an individual in order to grow myself and propel myself, just get the opinions of vast different people based on how I see things, see if people are seeing things the same way I'm seeing things, and what is it that I'm not seeing? What are some blind spots that I have? With the goal of just bettering myself as a person, as a human being. So I find that when I'm in conversations with my network, the conversation tends to be the same because we're all in alignment. So I have done a very good job of choosing friends and family members that agree with me. So I'm open to hearing what, you know, people have to say who listen to this podcast and seeing if there's a new way in which I can develop myself.
Thank you, Andre.
You're welcome.
I could go. My name is Star, and I said yes to this podcast because I felt it was important to uh, be have like be a kind of representation for people that look like me. Because growing up, I didn't have that. I didn't have people who looked like me, sounded like me, and who shared the same values as I did. I didn't have that kind of image to look up to or to aspire towards, or and I felt so alone with my opinions too. So I think it's important that we have this kind of open forum and discussion so that people out there who can hear and connect with it know that they're not alone, and feel they're free to air their opinions and feel supported through this.
Hmm. Thank you, sir. Yeah, I guess I'll go next. Yeah. My name's Reno, and some of you may recognize me. I've been involved with the Gay Men's Brotherhood for a while. I am a spiritual life and business coach, a writer, and a facilitator. And I said yes to this conversation because I really felt like it was an important conversation to have. And the decision to say yes, I'll have to be transparent, it wasn't an immediate one. I wasn't immediately a yes. I took some time to check in with my body and really feel into, um, is this right for me? And is this something I want to do? It wasn't about anyone else, and it wasn't about, um, you know, um, the decision was about me, and really about whether or not it was aligned for me to to engage in this topic and in this way, in this space. And there were some things that I had to reflect on, and I came to the conclusion that I really want to be a part of this conversation, and I really want to be someone who is actively participating in and facilitating these kinds of conversations. So I'm really happy to be here. And as far as internalized racism and what it means to me, I think that what I've come to understand about internalized racism through my own experiences is that um, it manifests as shame and self-hate, um, in relation to my race and my anything associated with my race in particular, or you know diverse ethnic groups. And I'm excited to dive into more of what that looks like and how I've experienced it. But I'd say that's my basic and general sort of definition of what it means to me. Yeah.
My name is Miguel, and I didn't really know as well if I would participate, but I just decided that I would overcome some fears and just allow myself to be heard, and just to be in a place to grow. I feel like I've always been on the side and not saying too much. So this is the time for me to um, express myself a little more. And what internalized racism would mean to me is just how I feel about myself, and how I uh, see others who are not um, Caucasian, and how this has affected us in the myriads of ways in which we think about ourselves and how we express ourselves. So that's what it means to me.
Thank you. Thank you all. Yeah. And I wanted to ask you, each of you as well, if you're comfortable to speak to your ancestry. So what are each of your origins? And I can go first. I'm a Trinidadian, Irish, and English and Scottish descent. So I'm what they call mixed. Yeah, yeah.
I can go next. So I was born in the Caribbean as well, on an island called Jamaica in the city of Kingston. I migrated to America, New York, when I was 5. And just last year, I got my citizenship. So I'm officially an American citizen now. Um, my family were all Jamaican. And just in order to get further, I did like an ancestry.com test last year because I wanted to know like what else is out there. But for the most part, my family is sister, parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, Jamaican.
You want to?
Okay. Well, I'm from Trinidad as well.
Mm,
There's a Caribbean crew here, okay?
yeah.
And my mix, I'm predominantly Black and Latino, and with hints of Portuguese and Chinese on both sides as well. So
I am half Filipino and half Mexican. So I have Latino roots of, various extractions. And my great grandfather is from Trinidad as well. No, I'm teasing, guys.
I was like, whoa, get out.
No. But yeah, so I was born and raised in Canada, and I live in the US now, but I'm trying to make my way back home to O Canada and just live the good life back at home. So yeah.
come on over.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Thank you. So I think a great place to start this conversation is by defining internalized racism. And so I've reviewed a definition because as I mentioned before we started recording, I'm still learning and I always will be. And that's exciting and humbling simultaneously. So internalized racism, by definition, is a form of internalized oppression, and is the internalization of racial oppression by the racially subordinated. Internalized racism involves both conscious and unconscious acceptance of a racial hierarchy in which whites are consistently ranked above people of color. These definitions encompass a wide range of instances, including but not limited to belief in negative racial stereotypes, adaptations to white cultural standards, and thinking that supports the status quo, i.e., denying that racism exists. So, also, internalized racism as a phenomenon is a direct product of a racial classification system and is found across different racial groups and regions around the world where race exists as a social construct. So, with all of that being said, I want to start with the question, what is your experience of internalized racism, and how did you come to recognize internalized racism for yourselves?
Okay, so I'll take it on. So how did I come to know it and recognize it? Because it is a constant conversation, and it's a conversation that has gone on around me even before I really understood what race was. How I understand it, I'm a very logical person. I'm brainy. People call me a nerd, I'll take it. Is just logically, mathematically, I think when you are a minority, which means the smaller population dealing with a majority, I think you're going to feel excluded in some way, shape, or form when a majority rules. So, and I think everyone can relate to that experience of feeling discounted because, it's like, oh, let's go to the movies. Well, I want to see this movie. And well, I don't want to see that movie, but we're going to see that movie anyway. And that feeling of not being heard, acknowledged, understood, or kind of cast aside. So I think when you grow up in a culture where you're a minority group, I think you're constantly trying to figure out how can you be heard? How can you be seen? Because there are certain complexities that do make us different that, you know, need to be acknowledged. So I go to a barbershop, but I go to a particular type of barbershop because of the you know, the way my hair is. So I don't choose to go to that barbershop because of racism, just because what's there for me and how they can cater to my specific needs is there. And if you have the privilege of not having to ever think about that, you won't understand why you can't say to me, you know, Andre, you're paying X amount of money for a haircut. Why don't you try Supercuts? It's much cheaper. Well, I wouldn't consider Supercuts because I don't think that they know how to handle my texture of hair. So that's when certain things especially become present, because I've got to find particular things or go particular places to get things that I need specifically for me. And if you don't have that experience, I find that you have a tendency to not be sensitive to that. Yeah.
Thanks, Andre.
You're welcome.
Hey, Reno, could you kindly just go over that question again about how we're experiencing it? Is that
Yeah. So the question was, what is your experience of internalized racism, and how did you come to recognize internalized racism? Yeah.
I think for me, I experienced it early on when I was growing up, you know, in Canada, and having the majority of my kindergarten classmates. I'm just thinking back to kindergarten right now, and all of them were white, and they weren't necessarily mean per se. However, there was just this kind of treatment that I sensed was different. And I couldn't put a finger on it per se, but I just knew that something was just different. And I didn't know how to handle that. But I think that was just my very first experience of it. And so from that point on, growing up in this town, and then, you know, staying with the same people throughout elementary school, it just became more apparent that, oh, okay, they're perhaps looking at me differently because of, you know, how I look. Maybe not necessarily how I conduct myself or how I speak English, but just because I look different from them. So, yeah.
For me, I think my realization came early at a fragile age. I mean, I say this all the time, but it's true. From Disney, from, you know, that young tender age where you look at, you know, the prince and the whole story, and I'm envisioning my life with the prince, quote unquote, you know, and I always saw that I didn't look like them, and the life that they seem to have, mine wasn't kind of lining up to that. And the only thing I figured out early at that age was that, you know, it's color of my skin. We have different color skin. So I kind of like, maybe, now that I think of it, maybe at some point early on, I kind of attached, you know, the admiration or having a lifestyle of, you know, the Disney world as looking a certain way, you know, being white with, you know, that, you know, the Ken doll hair, you know, it's, I didn't, you know, the things that you take for granted when you were younger, you only now think of it, and you ask yourself, like, wow, like I wish I could go back to that age and show myself a different perspective. But if I have to be honest, I think that is the start of my realization of my internal racism a bit.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I can definitely relate, I would say, to most of the examples shared here. And I think for me, I didn't really understand the concept of internalized racism until my adulthood. Um, it would have been probably maybe my mid late, no, I would say probably my mid 20s. Um, my earliest experience of it, though, one of my earlier experiences I recall is seeing seeing the Backstreet Boys, or watching Disney movies, or NSYNC, these pop groups and these pop icons, so frequently light skinned, blonde haired, um, you know light eye color, and not really knowing the impact that a lack of representation had on me until until later on in life, and seeing all of these little instances where maybe I wanted to stay out of the sun because I didn't want my skin to get darker, right? Where does that come from? How does a kid come to feel that way, right? Or I started chemically straightening my hair, you know and if you've ever relaxed your hair, like, this is a chemical poison. um and again, there is no judgment here because I've done it, and I'm not going to say that I wouldn't ever do it again, but it's unlikely. But this is a chemical poison that you put in your hair that strips it so that it is bone straight. um and I used to put this stuff in my hair so that I could have whiter hair, straighter hair. I had bleached my hair at another point, again, not because I wanted to bleach my hair because it was cool, but because I wanted to be more white, and where does that come from? And I remember being in Southeast Asia, and I was looking for a moisturizer, and I could not find a moisturizer without a skin bleaching agent in it. And I realized, like, that messaging, that you know that Eurocentric messaging is so insidious that it had somehow crept its way into my psyche and influenced how I perceived myself, and manifested as a sort of hatred toward myself, sometimes in very explicit ways, but other times in just really subtle ways that seem harmless, right? Like, oh, me wanting to have a lighter brown shade of skin seemed harmless. It was like, oh, and or straight hair, or wearing colored contacts. It all seemed so harmless until I realized that it wasn't. It wasn't at all, and that I did not love who I was, and that didn't come from nowhere. It came from somewhere. It came from all over the place, right? Um, and so now I would say, at this point in the stage in my life, um, and for years, the work has been um, what I learned is called becoming critically conscious. So really being aware of the subtle ways in which racism becomes internalized in my experience. Yeah.
Can I just add a
Yeah,
bit?
please. Yeah. Open conversation.
As you were talking, like, voice coming back. I remember when I was 5 or 6, my cousin and I, we would like put our arms, inside part of our arms and compare complexions. And, it's stuff like that that you think, where did I develop that, And I would say it's, well, the media, because, that's what you were exposed to as a child, But I don't know, it's, as you said, it's just the little things that seem to seep into our subconscious mind so sneakily that we don't even know that it's cemented, like it took root, and it changes our entire perspective of how we do things, how we see the world. And like I remember growing up in schools, they would call me Oreo because you're black on the outside and white on the inside.
Me too.
Yeah. Just because I spoke a certain way, or like the things I liked, it shaped who I am. And I sometimes wonder, like, what would my life be if I was not exposed to those, little
Microaggressions.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Mhm.
Anyway, and well, I'll let Andre, you can share.
Yeah.
I do think it is a common, or maybe too common, of a conversation in the Black and Brown community. I think part of what maybe the source is feeling a lack of representation. But for example, us having this conversation, I don't think would be considered very unusual. But I think if we had 4 white people who were discussing their internalized racism, we'd be like, for what?
Yeah.
What do you mean? And yet at the same time, there are people who exist that really acknowledge the creativity and the beauty and the entertainment and just all the amazing things about the Black and Brown community, that they do express, like, man, I wish I could be like you, like the grass just seems so greener. But I think because it is just so common within our community to have this type of conversation, we would not even consider that that people of different ethnicities are thinking the same thing. And I think that is that's really a conversation that we just continuously have, that maybe what is needed is, well, where's the resolve? Where does the conversation get a solution and then it's done, right? It's just consistently ongoing.
When you say, Andre, when you say they're thinking the same thing, what did you mean by that?
Okay, very good. So for example, I have had people of different races, nationality, all of that might say, Andre, I really like your hair. I think your hair is really beautiful. Can I touch it? And I'll be like, yeah, for me, it's like, if you ask me, that's fine. But if you just dip your head in my hair, like, I feel violated, like, wait a minute. But for me, that's fine, because I know for them it's intriguing. And I know for them, sometimes it's like, what they're not saying is, I wish my hair was like that. I think that's cool. I wish I could style myself like that. And because I'm not like you, I can't. However, I think Black and Brown people will more openly have a conversation about how we experience wanting a different hair texture. At some point in our lives, it's like we experience this feeling of, I want a different hair texture. This is not the right hair texture. Whereas you won't find a lot of Caucasian people saying, I don't want this hair texture. I want a Black and brown hair texture. It's just not a common conversation. And maybe within their culture, it's not even an appropriate conversation. Maybe somebody would look at them like, what are you saying? And it's not like we don't get that response too from other Black people, like, what are you saying? What do you mean you want to change your hair texture? It's just not unusual to go through life feeling that. And a lot of that, I do think, comes from the fact that, you know, visually you see the majority so much and you see what they have access to. It's a want to have access to it. You know, I look at myself every day. So, you know, sometimes I get bored. I'm like, you again? So I'll change my hair up because it's still me, but it presents a different side of me. And sometimes I'm not doing it because I want to necessarily change my ethnicity. Is that I just want options. So I've done blonde, I've done pink, I've done red, I've done, you know, all these different type of hairstyles just because I want to present myself as myself in another way. Especially because when I look in the mirror, I do feel like as a Black person, I don't think I have as much options when it comes to hairstyle as somebody who may have straight hair. You know, I think if you look through a catalog of hairstyles for people with straight hair, it's like hundreds and hundreds of pages. Whereas as a Black man, it's like you go to the barber shop, it's pretty much the same barber photo on the wall with a square of like, you know, 20 hairstyles that you could choose from. And that's your options, like fade, ball fade.
Yeah.
So I think it comes from, sometimes my internalized racism comes from wanting to feel not restricted. Wanting to, when you see what's possible for other people and you see these options, it's like, I want that. And sometimes you have to wonder, is the reason why I don't have that because I'm Black? You know, you kind of just, I think you go through a period of wondering, is being Black or brown a restriction? And I think you kind of process it like it might be, or it might not be, but I think it's just, it is a part of the process with being Black. I think we do have these conversations.
That's a powerful question too, I think. Is being is being a Black, Indigenous, or person of color, what was the word you used? A restriction. A restriction. Yeah, yeah. That's quite a question. Yeah, yeah.
Well, I think that it's a restriction maybe because we might have been led to believe it is a restriction, right? I mean, who's to say you can't just be exactly who you are and to be perceived as just as worthy and beautiful and sexy like anyone else? Why do you have to change your, you know, external appearance? I mean, yes, you can choose to do whatever you want with that, just for experimentation, but to be, you know, perhaps perceived as more desirable or acceptable, I don't know. But it is a good question for sure.
I used to think it was a restriction. I don't feel that way anymore. I think that there is certain frustrations, certain trials and tribulations that come with, you know, for everyone that comes with who you are. I think it's frustrating to be in those conversations or have certain realizations. But I don't think it has stopped me from getting the things I want. It's had to make me maybe more crafty. It's maybe had to make me work harder. It's made me have to show up differently. But at the end of the day, I'm gonna get what I want. You know what I mean? Like, it's gonna happen. So in some ways, it's made me more savvy and creative. And I think in a lot of ways, that is what a lot of people kind of look at when they look at Black and brown people and think, man, I wish I had that. You know what I mean? It's like one day, you know, we decided, you know what, we don't have such and such material for clothes. So let's just create this style and wear it and do it like this. And then it becomes popular that all of a sudden people are like, you know what, I want to do that too. And they have no idea where it comes from. But we're just that creative. It's like, we're going to find a way. We're going to make
necessity
it happen.
breeds creativity. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think
Miguel, I'm curious. You spoke to some of your experiences at an earlier age. And I'm wondering, in contrast, you know, as an adult now, how have you seen internalized racism show up in your life, and you know, maybe during those earlier years, and even maybe in more recent years, if it's been present? Yeah.
Well, you know, given the political climate here in the last 4 years in the US, I think, I can only speak for myself. I don't know that I'm alone, but I feel as though that there is this very low grade paranoia about how others would treat me, even just upon going to the grocery store, or, you know, other public places where you could access just your everyday needs. And I didn't necessarily want to think that way, but I did. So from kindergarten to, you know, the experience that I have now, I think it's still, I think it's just been emphasized in the last little while, just because of the tense political climate here in the US.
And
so,
if you were to be explicit, and
Yeah.
you said, I think it's just been emphasized. If you were to be explicit, what is the sort of idea or narrative that you see as being emphasized, and sort of how do you experience that as a thought? Like, what is the thought for you? Yeah.
That somebody could potentially harm me
Because you
because
are,
I am not Caucasian.
yeah.
Because I also live in an area where it's predominantly white at this, you know, where I live now, and it's rural. I mean, rural Canada, rural US, very similar. So it's just the way it is. You know, I feel that, I mean, there are good people and bad people everywhere, but I think everything was just very poignant and more emphasized within the political climate. And so I thought, okay, well, do I now restrict my mobility? Do I just stay home and just really be safe, or do I just get out there and do what I need to do? And so I thought, well, I am just going to do what I need to do. And if people choose to, you know, make comments or even attempt to harm me, well, it's the chance I must take, because I need to live as well. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Yeah.
So we can't talk about internalized racism without talking about some of the manifestations of internalized racism, which I think will be very helpful to those listening, and ourselves included, to kind of unpack as much as we can in a single episode, which is a bit tricky, obviously. But you know, reflecting on some of the manifestations, you have things like self-image and beauty standards. You have things like stereotype threat, which is essentially, you know, internalized and projected conformity to negative stereotypes. So it might be something like, for example, let's say Black people steal, therefore they can't be trusted, right? If if we're seeing those narratives, if we're experiencing those narratives, whether explicitly or implicitly and subliminally, over time we may internalize that narrative, and what may end up happening is that um, we see a person of color, a Black person, sort of approaching, or a group of Black people in the same room as us, and we hide our precious belongings, right? Even as people of color, we hide our precious belongings. You know, people of color are dangerous, so we see a person of color coming our way, you know, on a dark street at 10 p.m. or something like that, and a wave of fear and anxiety comes over us, right? Where do these things come from? You know, this is another example of manifestation of internalized racism. You know, as far as self-image and beauty standards, I was saying earlier as well, there's an experiment that was done where they had a group of children of color choose, you may have heard about this, choose their favorite doll, right? The doll that was the best doll. And inevitably they ended up choosing the white doll, right? So that's just one example, and one very explicit example of internalized racism, right? And why did they choose this doll? Well, because light skin, blue eyes, and light hair is better, you know, is what they were taught. And then also another manifestation that shows up is in educational institutions, curriculum, the media, environments, and communities. So this is where we see predominantly Eurocentric education and curriculum, right, in textbooks. And you know, I think it's also important to note and acknowledge some of the events that are taking place both in Canada and the United States right now, where there have been discoveries of bodies of children who were in residential schools, you know, and over in the United States, I mean, there are so many things happening. Black people are being killed by police, and you know, and then of course, it's important to acknowledge the, you know, these acts of what is described as Asian hate, right? All of these things are very much alive right now, and you know, this media and being bombarded with these narratives and all of this stuff happening can't help but you know, inevitably become a form of internalized racism, fear, etc., right? And then lastly, Eurocentrism, right, which is ultimately it's in textbooks, it's on the television, it's in music, it's in the spaces we find ourselves in as minorities, and so our experience becomes the European experience, right, by default, by proxy. So with all of that said, you know, coming back to some of these manifestations, I'd be curious to hear what you all have noticed as manifestations of internalized racism for yourselves.
So you brought up a lot of different categories,
Yeah.
and I find it very interesting because I do think there's trauma in generalization. So we generalize certain things just because we want an easy answer. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
So here we are, 4 different individuals. And for a lot of people, they may look at this and say, let's generalize that they all like the same food, so that if we invite them over for dinner, you know, we know what to make. But the truth of the matter is we really miss out on the fact that people are individuals and how it affects who we're being. So, you know, you date somebody, they cheat on you, now all men are cheaters. So you miss out on the opportunity to date the non-cheater because you have generalized that everyone is the same. So I think that fear breeds trauma. And I think in a lot of ways too, the trauma is unorthodox. So, you know, we will see a sports game, right? And after the game, a majority of white might be partying and they will flip the cars over and they will just go wild, which to a lot appears like a form of rioting, right? But we generalize and we say, oh, that's just white people stuff. Like we make it okay. And the conversations we have are just don't be a part of that. Just that's what they do. It's okay. Yeah. And I think that's where the word privilege comes from, and being a part of a majority comes from, because it allows you to get away with things. It gives you access to something, because what are we going to do? Are we going to arrest, 50,000 white people? Are we going to arrest, 100 Black people protesting? You know what I mean? That numbers game is really tough. I think within our community, when it comes to beauty standards, that is a whole nother issue that we as a community really need to take on. Mm-hmm. And beauty really take.
Sorry, beauty standards. How? Like, could you go?
Redefining what is beautiful.
Oh yeah.
And it really messes us up in the fact that I think we have a lot of missed opportunities, in the sense of I remember at one point I used to just wear like a goatee, and I thought I was cute. And then I went a few weeks without a haircut, and then, it started growing out. And I remember some people would say, oh, I like that beard. Oh, you look good with that beard. Or people who have a hard time growing a beard would be like, Andre, I wish I could grow a beard. And I just got present to what it made available for me is a whole nother population of people that are attracted to something that I wasn't present to, right? So there's people that are attracted to people who are bald. There are people who are attracted to people who are thin. There are people, but I think because of internalized racism and the beauty standard, we miss out on opportunities to participate in the world in a way in which it's coming from a place of internal love. So we can participate and fully experience love. So we'll always hear, the term, you can't love somebody else until you love yourself. But when you have these internalized racism beauty standards, you learn at a very young age to hate yourself. Mm-hmm. And you spend a lot of your adult life with that trauma, trying to figure out how to unpack that, so that love can be available, so things like that.
Yeah. I think that, when you talk about standards of beauty, Andre, I think certainly within the Africanesque communities of Canada and the US, it exists completely. But wow, when I started learning more about the Latinos, for example, it really exists in the Latino community as well. So, when you even look at, let's say, for example, Univision or Telemundo and all, the news media stations, who are the people that are represented as the newscasters. They're more of the light-skinned Latinos, right? Mm-hmm. So all of a sudden, perhaps you're now understanding that certain things are reinforced. That if you have a lighter skin color, then that's more desirable. That's what's going to get you further on in your life or in your career or things of that nature. And then, of course, now if you're mixed, if you have, I don't know, let's say if you're half Filipino and half white. Well, because that person would have more of a lighter skin tone, then that person could be perceived as more beautiful, or that person is going to get farther in their career because at least they have a certain amount of Caucasian blood. Yeah. So the aspect of what we find attractive, I think, is, and standards of beauty, I think, are very interesting to ponder as the races are mixing, because it's just inevitable right now. A lot of people are just marrying different folks, and I think it's beautiful, honestly.
I definitely think when you don't have a representation, you're going to internalize what is beautiful. If you're watching a runway show and nobody looks like you, you're going to internalize, well, why doesn't no one look like me? Does that mean I'm ugly?
Right.
You're going to internalize the missing. And I definitely think that's the missing part of the conversation, is that when we ask for representation, we're asking for it because this is how it impacts us when it's not present. We internalize it and we make ourselves wrong for it not being present.
Right. And I think it's really, things are changing slowly. For example, in the English-speaking news media, you are having more African Americans and African Canadians being on, as the newscasters, and some Latinos. So things are changing, but it's still, I don't think there is as much of a representation as could be brought forth.
And I don't think people really get the difference it makes. Like
right.
When Barack Obama became president of the United States, right? It changed elections forever. Like all of a sudden we had women, we had non-politicians, we had all of this stuff happening. And I don't think elections will ever be the same ever again. Because what he created as a representation is anything is possible.
Right. So
now people are like, you know what? If he could do it, I'm running for it. I'm running for this. I'm running for that. That's what the presence of representation does. It creates possibility.
Star, you looked like you had something to say.
Yeah.
Sorry, Star.
Maybe I'll go back to it. As reading.
Don't internalize it, Star. Don't internalize
it. To go back to a previous point, I was reading a bit and I came across a woman called Donna Bivens from the Women's Theological Center. And she was saying that internalized racism in itself is a whole system on its own. It has its own life, it has its own rewards and punishments. And for Blacks specifically, there's an unconscious reward when we participate in internalized racism. For example, just for speech, for example, look at someone maybe in the African American diaspora or even Caribbean who speaks dialect or their slang, the Black slangs, versus someone a Black person who speaks with standard English, right? The person who speaks standard English is usually considered more educated or less aggressive, and that's what I've realized with me personally. Fortunately, I had the opportunity to, further my education and kind of adopt a more standard English approach. And that has taken me far in my career, in social settings. I mean, I still get the same treatments that Reno, you were discussing earlier, with being followed in a supermarket, and still have to be very conscious of your image. And I spoke about this in a podcast Michael and I had done before, which we didn't release yet. And I was explaining that when I'm if I go to a supermarket, if I have to put my hand in my pocket to take my phone out,
Yes.
I am so conscious to,
Yes.
try not to look suspicious, take it out smoothly, make sure there's no item in my hand, you know, do what I need to do and make sure that it doesn't look like if I'm stealing or going to do something nefarious. It's so much to think about that I think people are not aware of just it's hard being a BIPOC, you know?
Yeah,
And
yeah. Other people don't have those experience. Not everyone has those experiences, those thoughts, has to consider those things, you know?
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. So
Yeah.
when
And I
we
think they'd be surprised to hear that you do. Some of them would be so surprised to hear that you do. Yeah.
exactly, yeah, even Michael was like surprised when I told him this.
Mhm.
And someone who adopts the Eurocentric approach with, having a strong command of the English language or um, dressing in a Eurocentric way, that looks non-threatening. I think that there's a little reward in it that they don't have to suffer, quote unquote, as badly as the people who are not.
Yeah. Oh, this is, I mean, I, this conversation, um, and I'm gonna out myself, because I'm not afraid to. Um, I know that, and I imagine y'all have heard this before too. Like I know, oh, you're so well spoken. Oh, you're so well spoken. You're so well mannered. Wow. Oh, you know, how many times, how many times does someone say that to a European person, someone of European descent, someone with white skin? Like I'm sure they don't really hear that at all, right? Um, and I recognize that having internalized, and it's so subtle, right? Because this is human conditioning. This is the human function. We recognize what we're praised for, we internalize it. We recognize what we are reprimanded for, we internalize it, right? It's just a natural function of the human existence. So if I see that I'm constantly praised for being so well spoken and so well behaved, or someone's like, "Oh, your hair looks so good," and it just happens to be up in a tight bun every time they say it, or they're complimenting me on my code of dress, when I'm wearing Eurocentric attire repeatedly. Well, without fail, I'm probably going to start expressing myself in these ways, right? So, Star, you nailed it with these subtle and also sometimes explicit rewards. The well-spoken brown person is more likely to get the opportunity because they're well spoken. What does that mean, well spoken? Well, it means maybe you speak with less of an accent, maybe you use less slang, etc. Right? You're more well adapted to the Eurocentric norm and status quo. And I would be lying if I said that I wasn't aware of those things. I'm very reflective, I'm very introspective, and maybe early on I didn't know explicitly that that's what was happening. But as I got older, it became very clear. Oh, when I talk like this, when I wear this, when I behave this way, when I adorn myself in hipster-like attire, etc., I'm rewarded. And one of the things that's become increasingly clear to me is, and I owe this to a fellow member of the Gay Men's Brotherhood, who's become a good friend of mine. Show me or tell me who you fuck or have sex with, date, marry, spend your money on, invest your time and your energy in, and provide with opportunities, and I will show you who you value, and that's a hard pill to swallow, including if you're a person of color who's never dated a person of color as well. And I'm not saying that I'm not, that I'm one of those people. I certainly have, but also I know that I have had an inclination to date lighter skinned people, right? And where does that come from? Well, it comes from what I saw, what I was taught, and how I learned to not value people who looked like me, etc. You know, so I'm always kind of observing from that perspective now, you know, where's your money going? Who are you having sex with? Who are you dating? Who are you investing your time and your energy in? Who are you giving opportunities to? Who are you giving space to? That will tell me so much about what you value. And that when I say you, I don't just mean people of European descent. I had to take that filter and look at myself and go, okay, maybe there's some things that I need to look at and grapple with and reconcile with within myself. Why am I ever chasing the cisgendered heterosexual white males, right? Why would I be pursuing these people? Why is it their love, their validation, etc., that I'd be wanting? Oh, well, you know, internalized racism, right? So yeah, I mean, I could go on, but I thought one of the things that I'm seeing increasingly important is for me to, as I said earlier, I'm going to out myself, is for me to really out myself in that way. I think it's so important because, you know, one of the phrases I live by is like, you know, feel it, reveal it, heal it, you know, and so if I want to work through this, I need to come out. I need to out myself and reveal the ways in which racism has been internalized within me, you know, the ways in which I may engage in upholding the status quo, the Eurocentric status quo, you know, the ways in which my you know, quote unquote preferences are actually a subtle manifestation of internalized racism, you know? Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I
So
definitely think. Go ahead, Mike. Go ahead, Mike.
yeah. So I just wanted to comment on what you said. Yeah. So Reno, I just wanted to comment about the fact that people, when you know, when you speak in a certain way with, you know, a certain kind of eloquence. Well, I've been in a situation where you know, I've had to translate for X number of people because I know French and I know Spanish and a little bit of Italian, right? And so people at work, it's not a situation now where people kind of think, oh wow, that's cool. They're now like looking at me saying like, who the hell do you think you are? So in other words, I feel like they think they're jealous, right? Instead of sort of saying, oh wow, you know, you can speak all these languages. So some people have now been maybe even threatened by the fact that, oh, I can communicate in different languages. So why can't you? So when you relate this back to a European, they speak lots of languages and no one bats an eyelash, right? So all of a sudden, somebody who is not white and they speak different languages, especially maybe their languages, it's a little tense sometimes. Right. Yeah. And I was also going to comment on, oh my goodness gracious, I had it in my mind. What was the last thing you were talking about, Reno? Just to refresh my memory.
Yeah, it was preferences and upholding the status quo, recognizing that by behaving, speaking, dressing in certain ways, there were certain rewards. Also, I think I said something about tell me who you invest.
Oh.
Yeah, that one.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to out myself too. So, and it's all for the world to see now. But okay, so I in viewing porn over the years, you know, both gay and straight porn, it's mainly, you know, Caucasian folks. Okay, beautiful, they're beautiful. But I'm at a point in my life right now where, man, you know what? I want to see some chocolate people having sex together in a big way. You know, I want to see some Asians. I want to see some Middle Easterns and Latinos and have that be a really awesome representation, on the porn hubs, et cetera, et cetera. And I just want to see that more because I'm really loving the variation. And this is why, I need to get out of this small town because I want to hang out with other people that are just different. And yeah, so I find myself even just, with, looking at, sex material, that I want something different than what's regularly out there.
And I want to say real quick too, I thought about this before because I knew coming into this I was going to out myself. And what I wanted to emphasize as well is that if you're listening to this right now and you're someone of European descent who is, let's say, white or Caucasian or light skinned, I don't want you to hear what we're saying and how we're outing ourselves, so to speak, how we're revealing our internalized racism, and to think that because we experience it, it somehow lets you all off the hook from having to do the work, and allows you to just kind of sit back and kick back now because, oh, well, they have their own racist tendencies too. That's not what this is about. This does not suddenly give you a hall pass or exclude you from doing the work. So I just wanted to emphasize the importance of that, Yeah.
Oh, the interesting thing, and thank you, Mike, because what I love is you could always count on Mike to talk about sex. I love it. I love it.
Not that you need to know this, guys, but my nickname in high school was Sex Machine. So okay, there you go.
I love it.
Well, you better get down to Vancouver real soon. Just kidding.
What's very interesting that I love that the three of you pointed to, and Star, you really started off real well when you talked about the rewards and stuff, is I think the missing that I think that anyone really should get, at least what's there for me, is that it's the frustration and exhaustion of always having to think. You're always having to think about it. I go back to my point before, I don't think it's a restriction. It's just that you're constantly having to think about it. So, when you're with yourself 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So when you are constantly thinking, if you're listening to this and let's say you're gay and you've ever thought about how should I present myself so that people don't know I'm gay, you're like constantly thinking about it. You may even say, you know what, I'm just going to be quiet. I'm just going to totally shrink myself in the room so that nobody finds out who I am, right? It's the same thing with internalized racism, is you are just constantly in a thought of, and it's almost a survival mode for some of us. It's like, how do I survive today? Because when you are literally concerned about your well-being, Star's given an example of like, I don't want to get arrested. I don't want to be in danger. Like, and the devastation is, for me, what I think it is, it manifests itself as really bad health issues, mental illness. It's very hard to be concerned and be in survival mode all the time. That's the frustration, that's the exhaustion. That's what I really hope that people get, is that it's tiring when you get no rest. And that's what's there for me.
Yeah. And I think we do, whether consciously or sort of unconsciously, but instinctively, we do what we can to survive. And my experience is that sometimes that means adapting to and adhering to a status quo that maybe doesn't serve us, but allows us to get by. that is maybe exhausting and detrimental in the long run, but will keep us alive and perhaps getting by and getting ours in some small way um, for a period of time. And that's just no way to live, you know? It's
Right.
just no, it's
Right.
no way to live. Yeah. 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 And I guess the last thing I'll say is like I've seen it in myself where and when I say oppressor, I don't necessarily mean an individual, although I do, but also like just the problem itself, you know. The oppressor can be a problem that exists. It doesn't just have to be a person. And I've seen myself sort of conform to the bar or the standards of my oppressor, you know, and that can be a really traumatic and shame-inducing experience. You know, it can be really sad and grief-inducing and shame-inducing, and it's an important conversation. Yeah, yeah. So I'm curious. You know, as we I mean, there's so much that we could discuss here today, and there's probably so much that was left on the table and off the table. With that being said,
We'll have to do a part 2.
yeah, I really think we will. Yeah, I really think we will. And I just want to make sure that everyone feels like they've kind of said everything they have to say before we segue, because what I want to talk about next is, you know, as we sort of move toward a close, is the conversation around what we're doing to navigate internalized racism and really create healing for ourselves, and create environments and experiences that support that as well, that undoing. But before we go there, was there anything else that anyone wanted to share in relation to experiences they had around internalized racism, or just any ideas related to what we've discussed so far? Okay. So I guess popcorn style, like whoever sort of feels inspired in the moment, I would ask, yeah, what are you doing to, or what is happening to support you in undoing, reconciling with, transmuting, transforming, integrating the pain, the trauma, the struggle that is internalized racism? Yeah.
I can start.
Yeah.
So I think just having this wonderful conversation with you guys has been a really good aspect of my healing journey, and just knowing that you know, there are the people that have my experience, but I'm also surrounding myself with people that truly love and accept me, you know, as I am, no matter what their ethnicity might be, for sure. You know, I'm listening to a whole bunch of, you know, spiritual leaders that also happen to be non-Caucasian, right? And I think that's great as well. And I think that, you know, as we, you know, have this journey toward, you know, being the best versions of ourselves that we can be, I think the onus is really on us to just boost ourselves up as much as possible, because, you know, people are going to come at you no matter who they might be. They could be your brothers and sisters, your partners, your parents, et cetera, et cetera. And I think the really, really important journey is just to really somehow have the strength to, really love yourself, despite what anyone else will say. And of course, it's easier said than done, right, guys? But I think that's basically what I'm doing right now in my journey, and certainly not easy, but I'm very thankful for the people that have come into my life very recently through this group, and just in general. So yeah.
That was actually similar to what I recommended. I would recommend. I think love is the answer. Self-love, like to me, didn't change until I accepted that I loved myself. That I had to love myself. I had to embrace who I am, embrace my Blackness, my Latino-ness, my allness, and realize that it is who I am. I can't change it. I can't turn it off, and just love yourself. I know in the beginning, in the earlier um, segment, I blame media. I do always blame the media. But I think in this case, sometimes you give a little props to media because on my path to self-discovery and self-development, I turned to music and I think I specifically sought out uh, information that will support the path I was taking. So even like I want to give props to like Beyonce. Sorry,
I love Beyonce. Yeah.
She kind of helped me embrace that, that strong, positive Black self that I didn't really see. In the documentary Black is King, you don't really see Black or BIPOC community as in a positive light often. So in times like this, I would give social media, like media, the props that they deserve when it comes to kind of helping mold that decisive path that you take. But the key is love.
I love that. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, for me, I would agree. Like, I do a lot of work, professional development, done therapy, done all of that. I recommend everything. And I'm really getting interested in the power to choose. Um, whereas I think when I was younger, internalized racism didn't feel like a choice. It felt like something that was forced on me. Now I feel that I have the power to choose. So just really quickly, there was like an episode of Pose
Ooh,
where
yes. Yes.
that's my
Yes.
show.
I
So
love that show.
there was an episode where a transgender woman was, arguing with her mom. And her mom said, if you could just tone it down a bit, we could really work something out. And her response to her is no, absolutely not. Why would I tone it down when I'm all about more money, more men, more beauty, more this? And I remember watching that thinking to myself, well, why didn't I choose that?
Yes. Yes.
Why
Yes.
is it that when I was dealing with stuff, I didn't say no,
Yes.
more this. So I'm glad that, I'm at a point in my life where I can choose self-love and I can choose more. And yeah, I want more. I'm going to give it to myself. I even choose to love myself by being on here because I finally got to a point where I'm like, Under, you're worthy enough for your voice to be heard too. So yeah, absolutely.
Wow. Yeah, it's funny. They talk about critical consciousness as being one of the ways that we empower and liberate ourselves from internalized racism. And And yeah, I think it ties in beautifully with this idea of choice and recognizing our freedom to choose, which comes with awareness. I can also relate very much to a time when in some ways I didn't know I had a choice. And my personal flavor of struggle was like, on the one hand, I remember feeling like I came out of the womb knowing that I was king shit, the queen shit too. It was like, oh, I didn't get the memo that like I wasn't privileged and y'all were. Like I'm gonna eat with this spoon and this fork and drink with this cup and be in this place, and I'm here because I have just as much right to be here as anybody else. And I just did not get, a part of me just did not get the memo that I was like any less than anybody else, and I I moved through life with this audacity and this nerve still, which requires courage and vulnerability as well. That comes with the territory. But yeah, I think what I'm up to these days, and this really started probably in my mid-20s, was okay, you know, uh, that chemical relaxer burnt my forehead. I was like, why am I even doing this? Like, this is absurd. Like, why am I putting this stuff in my hair? And these contact lenses, like, they're not even that comfortable, and I just started seeing content. And I think the big moment for me was the year there was the Pride party, and it was a white party. And at that point, I had just cut all my hair off. I was like, I'm done with this relaxing stuff. I'm not doing it anymore. I'm done with these colored contacts. I am Black. And it was that My Black is Beautiful campaign had come out. And I put that on a shirt that I wore to this event. And it was so cool because Deborah Cox, I think is her name, was performing that night. So it was a moment where I was like, yes, there's this fabulous Black woman on stage. Everybody in the audience is like cheering, and it was just this moment for me where I was like, yes, like, we're that. I am that. We are that. And it's continually been a journey of surrounding myself with other, with other fabulous, amazing, beautiful people of color, BIPOC people, and not just BIPOC people, but queer, QTPOC people, like queer, trans, gay, unit across the board, like, marginalized people. And even being in this space, I have to admit, like, there was a moment where I was just like, oh my God, like, you're all so beautiful. We're so beautiful. Like, and I don't always feel that way when all I'm seeing is like, sort of, yeah, like just the, the people of European descent, Caucasian people, when I'm always surrounded by them. It's hard for me to find myself and my beauty in a space like that. So this is one of the ways in which I'm healing, is spending time in spaces like this, having conversations with people like y'all, and seeing and appreciating your beauty and your brilliance and what you have to offer. And then going, oh yeah, like, that's me too. I'm that too. We are beautiful. Um, and and as much as I can, coming back to Beyonce and media and content, immersing myself in in a non-Eurocentric experience, ultimately. I think those things have been really significant. And the last thing is, in my exploration of spirituality and psychology and mind and thought and consciousness, etc., what I've quickly come to realize is, um, how would I say this? We're all experiencing life through the filter of the human condition. And I think in understanding that, I can have compassion and empathy and understanding for people's humanity, including my own, and go, you know what? Like, we're working with what we know. We're working with our our understanding, which can evolve over time with new information and new insight. And it allows me to take things less personally and to just go, you know what, I'm here living my best life. um, I create my experience. I decide my experience. Um, and, the color of my skin and the texture of my hair and the color of my eyes and, the bridge of my nose, etc. Like none of these things, this does not make me any lesser, any less qualified, to, 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 to receive love, to receive money, to be compensated, to create, to build a business, to thrive in this world as anybody else, and that is what I'm about right now, and helping other people see and live and experience that. Yeah. Whoo! Praise. Amen.
I
Yeah.
think we're at time.
Yeah. Okay. Well, with that said, I guess we can close out. I want to say thank you um, to listeners for showing up to this conversation, this introductory conversation. We know that we are not experts. We know that things have been left on the table and off. This is just the beginning of a conversation, and we're not here to get it right. We're just here to have it, to start it, to open the conversation. And I want to honor each of you for boldly, bravely, beautifully showing up and brilliantly showing up to this conversation. Really appreciate you all, and I'm so excited. I really hope we get to do this again because y'all are amazing. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.